magic number.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Trialogues podcast. My name is Gaylord DeWald. I'm the president and janitor of Thought Faucet. I've got with me, as usual, my partners in crime, Rob Hahn and Matthew Shadbolt, who will be doing their own introduction. So, Rob, why don't you tell people who you are?
Sure. And I think I would like to clarify that by partners in crime, Gaylord does not suggest that we are engaged in any felonious activities that would potentially endanger my bar license in the state of New York. Just want to clarify that for any law officers who might be listening to this podcast. My name is Robert Hahn. I am the managing director of 7DS Associates, and most of you probably know me as Notorious Rob.
My name is Matthew Shadbolt. I'm the Director of Interactive Products and Marketing at the Corcoran Group here in New York. And I'm responsible for anything digital that touches the customer. We're just coming off a pretty heavy week where we launched our iPad app, which has been very, very exciting. So we've been traveling to brand conferences and doing a lot of stuff on the road this month. So it's nice to be back in the office and chatting with you guys today.
Awesome.
Hey, one quick thing, Matthew. I just wanted to let you know I got a Facebook message from an agent who asked if I had seen your iPad app, the Corcoran iPad app, and I said no, frankly I hadn't because I don't live in New York City. And he actually says it's perfect. So just wanted you to know it's one guy's opinion, but at least one agent out there thinks that your app is perfect. Well, another feather in your cap to raise your self-esteem.
That is amazing to hear, and I'm glad that we hit the one person that we targeted with the entire project there. So
awesome.
It's always nice to hear.
Think
when you're in the middle of the product development cycle, perfection just seems completely unattainable. And when you hear things like that, it really means a lot. We internally think it's far from perfect, but we decided to launch at a place that we were comfortable, and it seems to be fairly well received, which has been absolutely incredible.
Right up.
Yeah, Rob, maybe you should get that agent's contact info to Matthew, so that way if they need to do a focus group on whether they did a good job or not, we can make sure that that's there. No, I saw a couple reviews of it. I haven't downloaded and played with it, but it looks really sharp, Matthew. And I know that kind of work takes a huge toll on internal resources and brain power and evenings. So congratulations on doing that heavy lifting. That's not everybody's able to do that.
Great. Thank
Congrats.
You.
Good job.
I appreciate it.
All right, now that we've got the Mutual Backslapping Society taken care of.
It wasn't that mutual. It was sort of one way, right? We were slapping Matthew's back, I think.
Yeah, well, usually he's slapping our back, so
That's true.
We're looking over the whole course of the podcast. All right,
guys are too.
So, Matthew, you were recently at a branding-related conference all the way out in Beantown, and it wasn't a real estate-specific one, from what you were saying pre-call. Can you give us what were some of your takeaways and your 5 bullet points of what realtors must do as a result of?
I don't want to read. I don't want to read anything here. Okay,
and
so
that's why this is a podcast, because it used to be a blog post, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's actually been a really sort of interesting 3 weeks. I went to San Francisco and did Inman Connect. And a few days back in the city, and then I just spent 4 days at something called the E-Tail Conference, which is a huge brand and marketing conference in Boston. And what happens is that you literally have hundreds of major brands from all around the world that descend on Boston and talk about digital marketing, basically. So it's a non-real estate event. To my knowledge, I was the only real estate person there, certainly the only real estate person that spoke. And I was on a panel, and I keynoted there. But aside from that, one of the most amazing things for me, and we've talked about this in relation to the Retso conversations, was that this idea of looking outside of the industry, looking beyond the industry, is incredibly valuable. And we'd had this sort of like very insular experience at Connect where, it's basically the real estate industry talking to itself. And that's not without value, but it's a very specific type of conversation. And then I sort of went completely the other way into this brand and marketing conference where you have people from United and Adidas and Campbell's Soup and Etsy and Stussy and, major brands from all across the world talking about the same things that we're talking about, like the problems of ROI or branding or how to, how to create more conversions or what happens in the funnel or how do you, increase your social following and all these kind of things that we talk about ourselves quite regularly. But to actually hear how those brands were tackling sort of mobile and social and the ROI of just digital in general was absolutely mind-blowingly inspiring. And one of them that particularly resonated with me was there was a guy from Campbell's Soup that spoke, a very unlikely sort of venue to hear something inspiring. But what Campbell's Soup are doing is that they're actually, really trying to focus on it sounds very brand and marketing oriented, but they talk about the ROI on amazing, that there is actually no place for third-rate or mediocre work anymore because that kind of work just dissolves online. It dissolves into the newsfeed. It dissolves in visibility. And
it's kind of like that Jason Calacanis article from a while back too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Jason Calacanis wrote an excellent post called The Age of Excellence, where he talks about this in relation to the App Store, 5-star ratings. And if anybody's listening on the call, that's a really, really amazing article to go read. Very inspiring. Gaylord and I had some back and forth on that. But Campbell's actually showed other examples. They showed examples from Coca-Cola and what they were doing, and they showed a spot that Coke had been running on college campuses, and it was a vending machine. It was filmed as if it was sort of like a security camera, almost kind of like a reality show.
I've seen that ad. That's pretty freaking amazing.
Where the hand is coming out the vending machine with like pizza and flowers, and the girl puts the coin in the top to get like the bottle of Coke, and out comes like a 12-foot sub. Comes out the bottom of the machine, and everybody in the cafeteria is freaking out, and just how amazing something as simple as that was, and how it relates to their sort of core brand ideas of what they called sort of it's sort of like a very Zappos kind of idea, this kind of idea of delivering happiness, and how Coke is associated with that, but how they created these very very small, actually quite inexpensive spots that completely resonated with their core audience, and how amazing that particular thing was. And it just struck me, and there were numerous examples of this. The United guy spoke about, what happens to your phone when you walk into the airport, and how mobile is completely changing things like check-in experiences, and what happens at the front desk, or what happens with luggage, and things like that, and how mobile is sort of like completely sort of disrupting and transforming airports.
There's only some truth to that, though, because, man,
the first question from the audience is, why don't you have Wi-Fi on your planes?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, number one, why don't you have Wi-Fi on your planes? Number two,
absolutely.
I'm a heavy traveler, and I travel United, and I use the United mobile app, and they got some work to do. So
absolutely.
They really have some work to do, and you know what? I understand what he's saying from a brand marketer standpoint, but that he's going to have to go talk to his product and tech teams because it's not delivering on the brand promise and the brand vision that they've got, which is a whole separate conversation.
He was very, very open and transparent about that. He was saying, like, we understand this is where it needs to go. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. But as the consumer changes, we know that this is a priority for us. But there's a tremendous amount of headaches associated with that. The merger with Apple alone, just the back end of merging two huge airlines. He was talking about how much of a headache that is, yet to come in years to come. But so there was like United and Adidas and Campbell Soup and Coca-Cola, and it just struck me, one of the things that really struck me with this is how these brands, they are actually solving real problems. They're actually solving real consumer problems.
Okay.
And
explain. You're going to need to expand on that one, Matt.
Yeah, and I will. And a lot of the conversation was focused on data, the use of data, and the optimization of the consumer experience, right down to the iteration on the size of a font and a button, and the highly detailed sort of streamlining of like a checkout process, for example, and how that process takes months and months and months of testing and iteration and A/B testing and stuff like that. And there was a tremendous focus on data and optimization of the digital customer experience. So, and as it was focused on delivering sort of brand satisfaction, and there was a lot of conversations about how to measure sentiment, for example, how to measure and how a metric like that drives sales. It was very sales oriented.
Of course.
And it was basically focused on results. And it seemed to me very disconnected from the types of things I'd heard at Connect, which were not focused on sales at all, and not really focused on actual concrete measurement of brand and marketing initiatives. And this was something that we had spoken about, sort of post-ICSF anyway, that there was a disconnect between sort of the economic realities of home ownership and what was being presented as marketing solutions.
Right.
But it struck me that there are, these major brands that are in the weeds with that problem right now and tackling it head on and making progress with that. And it was a stark sort of reminder of me of the work still ahead of the real estate industry, whether that's a brand conversation or an IT conversation or a measurement conversation. But it just seems like we're not having that conversation at all at the moment. And it seemed to be, I actually thought it was a tremendous space of opportunity for us more than anything. So that's sort of like the 50,000-foot takeaway of this stuff. But, it was very inspiring. And how you create these amazing experiences at scale and then measure them was really, really interesting. I think that, whenever you go to a brand and marketing conferences, they always talk about social as if it's a campaign, which I sort of fundamentally disagree with. I think social is sort of like an ongoing thing rather than here's what we're going to do for social for spring, for example.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? But the deriving, one of the things that they spoke about was how you derive value from connecting data, and how it leads to, I'm just looking at my notes here, basically how it leads to the reimagining of nearly everything that you do. And it's sort of like almost like just starting again as it relates to this stuff. Certainly mobile. Just start again. Just start, say, what would you want this to be? Don't try and squeeze your website down to a 4-inch screen. Actually try to consider the device and the user in the moment at that place and things like that. So,
so
I know
I'm going to push back now a little bit because
sure.
I want to know what you meant by these companies and these brands are solving real problems. Do you mean real problems of the business of the corporation, or do you mean real problems of consumers, of their customers?
Yeah, real business problems, basically.
Okay.
And solving consumer, if the consumer problem is sort of like the sort of second tier of that. You solve one, you solve the other, I think. But
because I was trying to imagine what real problem does Coca-Cola solve, and
Oh no, I'm talking about the.
If I'm too thin, then Coca-Cola could, probably help me out with that. But I'm just contextualizing. You mean the real business problems of sales, revenue, growth, market share, all those wonderful things that keeps the company in existence. Okay.
Absolutely. It's like, how does Coca-Cola as a business continue to be relevant and meaningful to the customer over the next 10 years? That's the business.
Here's what I'm curious about, Matthew, because, I hear what you're saying, and obviously, something that we have talked about at, numerous events, numerous conferences, blog posts, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. I actually disagree in the sense that I feel that we've had these conversations around branding, around, real estate brands and what they mean. Do they mean anything? Are they doing anything effective, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm wondering is, at this brand conference, did you have any major, what I'll call sort of connector brands? By that, what I mean is, the issue with real estate brands, if you will, is that their customer is not who they market to necessarily, right? In other words, the brands are trying to market to and become meaningful to consumers, but the customers of the brand are the agents themselves, typically. So, it's almost like a middleman matchmaker type brand. So if you will, I'm wondering if eHarmony or maybe Travelocity or, one of these sort of connector type brands.
Bob, I want to jump in on that first because a lot of like regular products exist in that kind of relationship as well. Like, Coke doesn't get on the shelf because a consumer wants it to be there. Coke gets on the shelf because a distributor takes it there, carries it, and because a retailer chooses to carry Coke. Like, that's how that works. Like, Coke probably sells a lot of product to people that aren't the actual consumer, but are same as like with real estate, one step up the food chain. So a lot of product in the world that's delivered to store shelves, the real customer, and Coke is probably not this way, but a lot of the product that is on a store shelf, the real customer is a distributor or a chain store buyer. Like for okay, so let me disagree with that. I mean, of course, you've got the entire logistics sort of distribution channel to consider, but fact of the matter is that when a consumer comes into the store and asks for, let me get a Diet Coke, right? They're asking for that product by name, which means the brand is really, really meaningful. In real estate, you never have a consumer coming in and asking for a house by name, right? They don't say, I want to buy whatever 1, 2, 3 name, or you might have that, but it's really not the same thing. And in terms of selling services, the issue from my standpoint is the brand doesn't have a distribution channel that's beyond the agent. And I think most real estate companies, most real estate brands, if they're really honest about it, and the honest ones actually say this. They say the agent is my customer. And my job as a brokerage or my job as a franchise or what have you is to make sure that my agents are, that their business is better by associating with my brand. So I don't disagree with what you're saying about distribution channels. You have to be careful. I mean, if you're Coca-Cola, you can't alienate Walmart, for example. At the same time, Coca-Cola is such a powerful consumer brand, Walmart can't exactly go to Coca-Cola and say, we're not going to carry your product anymore. I know it's a slight distinction, but I think it's one that makes sense.
Yeah, one of the people that spoke, Rob, just to counter what you're talking about, one of the people that spoke was Etsy. The guys from Etsy in Brooklyn spoke, and they have a sort of similar model, basically, where they're really an outlet for people to have their own stores, and then you have like Etsy, and then you have the creators, if you like, who I guess in our world would be sort of like the
right.
And then you have the product, which in our world would be the home, and in their world it would be actually what gets added to the cart. But Etsy as a sort of facilitator of all those things, there's still tremendous value in there, and obviously Etsy is a very, very strong business as well. So, there are very, very similar types of models, even outside of the logistical distribution of the product, to Gaylord's point, where, defining who the customer is, it was a retail conference, so a lot of it was really just focused on the end consumer, the person that clicks add to cart. So when I spoke, I said we don't in our industry we don't really have storefronts, not really. We don't do coupons, and we don't have an add to cart button. I did qualify that by saying yet.
Wow, is this a hint into the future of how? I'm kidding.
Well, they already have it for rentals. I don't see why it won't someday find its way into investment house buying.
But in many ways, my point was that there are very, very strong parallels. The very, very strong parallels in terms of the process that the person who buys the home, right, who I identify as the customer, right, the end customer, the person, who lives in the home at the end of the process, right?
Yeah.
That person has very, very strong parallels with what was being presented. And, in terms of the conversation that we have internally amongst ourselves within the real estate industry, we iterate many times in terms of like who's the customer, whether it's the agent or the brokerage or, what the brand concerns are between those two things or anything. But in the real world, the customer is the customer. And I think that that's a very, very strong message that helps build brand equity. It helps build business. And it just makes for just stronger, more focused marketing as well. The customers, and that's sort of that's a message that I think is still very muddied in the real estate industry.
Oh yeah, of course. But I don't know if this is a segue or not, but I would actually like to get your thoughts, Matthew, on given that you just went to 4 days of branding. Have you guys seen this NAR ad? It's getting a lot of traction on Facebook and elsewhere. The 1,000-watt guys wrote something on it.
I caught up on all the news, and I saw it's like is it just a TV spot, or is it anything beyond that, Rob?
I heard about it through, Facebook, so as far as I know, it's just a TV spot. But I was curious what your take on it was, because now we have a situation where, literally NARs, we could argue that the brokerage, the customer is the end customer who spent the money, et cetera, and the brokerage somehow gets paid through it. NAR, in a very real way, they don't sell anything. They're not selling houses. They're not selling franchises. They don't actually sell anything, and they put this out. Now, I was curious about it because the conversation evolved into a whole branding conversation. So I was wondering, Matthew, if you had any thoughts about that.
Wait, before we go further on that, Rob, just for people who might be listening in that might not have heard the ad or anything like that, could you give a quick summary about what happens in the ad?
Certainly, and I think you can find the ad if you don't see it on your TV, local TV channels. I actually found it by going to the 1,000-watt website, and there's a blog post in there about it, and there's an internet video linked to it. But essentially, it takes a page from the Coldwell Banker ad of a few months ago, where they had Tom Selleck. It was this very soft focus, sort of talking about home ownership, and it's about family and all this stuff. But the thing that I think has some people up in arms was they essentially make the claim that home ownership is correlated, at least correlated, if not caused, and I guess by the actual verbatim language, it would say it's caused by, because they say home ownership contributes to higher self-esteem and higher test scores in children of homeowners, which makes all of the renters go, what?
And I'm not sure it says children, Rob. I think it just says test scores.
I can't. I'll go back and listen to the verbatim again. But the thing that has people going, what the hell, is that essentially they're saying that home ownership it contributes to higher self-esteem and higher test scores, which then made a lot of the renters and agents who handle rental business sort of throw up in their mouths a little bit. So it turned into this whole branding discussion, and I just started going, okay, what brand are we talking about here? Like, what's the brand promise? What's the branding impact of this? And I just thought, let's ask you guys what you thought. I certainly have my thoughts, but I want to hear what you guys have to say.
Gaylord, why don't you go first?
Well, I guess for me, it makes me wonder about the NAR's understanding of statistics and causality and correlation, I guess, would be the thing. Like, I'd be really interested to see how they use data to derive the idea that living in a house is somehow correlates to better test scores or happiness. Like, I'd be curious to see that, because I think that would be a pretty hard thing to prove. So, I mean, my gut reaction would be to say, oh, well, it's another example of the Realtor Association maybe not understanding how statistics works very well. I know there have been some actual studies about this kind of topic, and typically they kind of the scientific ones that I've seen in the past have actually shown the inverse of that, and that people who aren't don't have a mortgage or whatever are typically happier and that kind of stuff. So for me, I mean, I haven't seen the ad itself, but to attribute ownership of a particular object resulting in a better test score sounds like maybe someone doesn't know how to do statistics or a study.
Yeah, I mean, the line, I think, that seems to be contentious here, certainly, I mean, I've not been involved in any of the online discussion, but I saw the ad, and the line verbatim is, owning a home contributes to higher self-esteem and better test scores. And they're showing, clips of children when they do that. And I mean, of course, I agree with you that it's, there's a statistical question here, but I'm not sure that you can make unattributed claims like that in advertising. Usually at the bottom of that you get like some kind of link, some kind of reference to the source of that claim, whether it's, some kind of federal study or, some kind of ComScore thing or whatever it is. There's usually some fine print associated with these things. And at the end of the ad, there's a link to the House Logic page, which has sort of bullet points going a little bit further on the conversation.
Right. Home ownership matters.
Related to why home ownership matters. And it's not just living in a house, Gaylord, it's actually owning a home. And that's an important distinction, I think. But, I don't know if it was, the UI of the site or whatever, but I couldn't find the source of the information.
Yeah.
And I think if you, and to me, that means that it's not being presented up front and clearly.
Yeah.
And
if there's no data, then
I question the claim. I question the claim as to specific, obviously, we talked about this in the past, happiness as a sentiment indicator that can be measured. This sort of, starts to skip near the whole like clout influence type conversation. It's an incredibly subjective thing to measure, and it's a thing that in many ways can't be measured. But I've read those same studies that actually suggest that renting is actually a happier experience. And while I don't think that those things are legal claims, and Rob, perhaps you can sort of clarify the legal implications of what this is, what this is skirting near. But
I think, in my opinion, and for the State Bar of New York, I am not offering legal advice in any way. I think just my opinion on it, there's no legal side to this. I mean, if you really want to get cute about it, the actual verbatim language, I've kind of listened to while you guys are talking, is that the child doesn't know that home ownership contributes to higher test scores and higher self-esteem. Well, I guess in theory you could just argue, well, and we don't know either whether home ownership contributes to the higher self-esteem. I mean, the actual language is the child doesn't know. So there's no legal angle on this at all. But certainly I think there's a branding conversation to be had because it's made a whole lot of people upset because it obviously sounds like the. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's just slimy. It's just a slimy approach. So they got some language in there that says the child doesn't know that blah blah. So they could say whatever they want after that, right?
Right. So like it's like saying, I don't know that Matthew doesn't dress in women's clothing.
Yeah, exactly. This is like have you beaten your wife lately kind of question.
Exactly. But there's no legal aspect to it, is what I'm clarifying, at least none that I can find. But, obviously we could spend, a bunch of time bashing on the ad itself, which which could be a lot of fun. What I wanted to ask about that though is this: it's relating it back to the issue of branding, right? Relating it back to that, I almost feel like we see this sort of thing in real estate a lot. Whether it is an ad like this one, where I think their intent was good. Their intent was to say something along the lines of home ownership matters. You see blog posts from realtors sometimes where the intent is really benign, but the branding impact is really negative. And I guess what I was wondering is, if we think about this from brand professionals' standpoint, isn't the issue here not the ad itself? I mean, again, people could get upset about ads. You could have controversial ads. I mean, think about when GoDaddy did their first, shocking ad and, what kind of, negative criticism that drew. But I almost feel like the issue here is that you have these messages, you have promotion, you have marketing that goes on without a real clear idea of what the brand actually is and what the brand actually stands for. I guess that's what I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think?
Yeah.
It's called Matthew. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's now two examples of that, right? There's the rally that happened, and now there's the ad as a way of trying to crystallize the goals and efforts of the association, right? And home ownership, number one, is a completely nebulous term. I think it means very different things to very different people, and obviously, per our previous conversation, there are thousands of realtors that don't do sales, and those folks are I'm sure feeling disconnected from the messaging here, and I think
pissed off.
Very often what happens is that home ownership is positioned as an aspirational goal of renting, and we see online a lot of rent to buy analysis and trying to move people from renting into buying and things like that. And one of the things that we spoke about at that NAR contingency planning session was that the data is showing less and less evidence of that happening in the future. That people are entering the market and remaining renters for longer periods of time than ever before. So,
I mean, I'm on record as predicting Renter Nation, on a go-forward basis. So I'm not. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, it's something that we're living and breathing in New York as well. I mean, we have incredibly low inventory and a fantastically fast turnaround of rentals at the moment. Incredibly aggressive market, and less and less available inventory for sales, which obviously has an upward pressure on pricing. So just the economics of it are pretty clear, I think. But to answer your question about the brand and marketing position of this, I mean, aside from the creative, which is it's competent, I think, but it's I think Coldwell Banker did a better job at executing essentially the same idea, I think.
Yeah.
I think it comes across as a little desperate, and it comes across probably not achieving the goals that it set out to do, either by speaking to its existing membership or ultimately speaking to the consumer. Because I think the ad speaks to the consumer, right? It's a consumer-based ad. The ad isn't driven for other agents, right? So when we're talking about the National Association of Realtors, they are talking on behalf of realtors. Do I have that right?
Correct.
Okay. So these are the views of the National Association of Realtors, and the assumption being that if you are a dues-paying realtor, we're representing your views and communicating them to the customer this way. And
Correct.
There's obviously going to be a fraying of agreement about something like that, because not everybody's going to agree on that kind of stuff based on their individual business. So, from a brand and marketing perspective, it seems incredibly risky to run something like that. And it's one of those things that we see quite a lot, especially in the real estate industry. We saw it during the Super Bowl, and we've seen it since, where big media spends are trying to sort of achieve larger brand and marketing goals. And in many ways, you know, where I end up with this stuff is sort of where I end up with what we see in social and mobile at a almost sort of nano level in comparison. It's not really a problem you can spend your way out of. You can't really throw money at buying media to turn the problem around. The problem is actually a little bit more grassroots. It's a little bit more fundamental. And as a result, I'm actually really encouraged by the appointment of people like Heather Elias and Noble Harta at NAR, because I think that they really kind of fundamentally understand these kinds of issues in a way that media spending won't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of like if your problem is that your message isn't getting out, then advertising might be a useful tactic. But if your problem is actually deeper in terms of what the experience of your customer is and all this other stuff,
right?
Throwing advertising money at it isn't going to solve it. And it kind of ties into some of this other branding stuff that you experienced at that conference that you were at, Matthew, and I've seen it at other non-real estate stuff that I've been to, where there's this sort of shift in the concept of what is branding, even where there's, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, people would talk about branding and they could maybe get away with meaning, the logo or the visual elements of the brand or the slogan or stuff like that. But that increasingly this gets down to increasingly the branding part gets into the realm of the experience. They're like, what is it really like to be, using this product? Is it great to be a part of this product or not? And that's where we see a lot of brands really getting slapped in the face. Whether it is this issue with NAR, like throwing an ad out that is is making some people concerned, or whether it's even like more fundamental, like the thing that's recently blown up with Progressive Insurance, where some woman that was had Progressive Insurance got hit by a car of someone who ran a red light. She was killed, and Progressive Insurance their lawyer actually ends up defending the guy who killed their customer so that they can avoid doing a payout. So that you can't get, like, that's the experience, and no amount of that flow, the redhead in the advertising is really going to overcome that kind of thing.
Yeah. I totally agree. I totally see the exact same thing. And if you think about, like, how that thing is handled online, you see, like, where media is being spent in terms of TV versus where it isn't spent. It's much more interesting to look at where there's no spend and how business is growing around no spend. So if you, like, I would struggle to I know that they have run them, but, like, Amazon doesn't really run TV ads. I know that they do, like, during the holidays, but primarily around the Kindle, right? But there's no real, like, brand ad for Amazon. Like, similarly, with like so many large internet brands, like, there's no Facebook ad, right? There's only recently been Google ads, and only really primarily around Chrome. And, there's no, like, if you think about, like, the big internet companies, they very rarely do media spends, because when you actually hear, like, an interview with them, they're so focused on the experience of the customer and optimizing that, which ultimately becomes like a brand discussion. They're so focused on that they don't need to buy media, because what happens is that they earn their media. This is a very sort of common conversation between brands.
Sure.
This conversation between earned and paid. And I think that, social is obviously a huge stimulant behind that. But at the core of it, you have to have a strong product, and you have to have very loyal customers, and you have to have an amazing experience. And this to go back to the Campbell's guy that I heard.
Right. Can I add a gloss on that, guys? I mean, I think I'm in total agreement with everything you're saying, but I want to add a gloss onto it this way. I used to think exactly that way about product, for, I don't know, for the longest time, and then a couple of years I started changing, I think, the way I think about things, and I want to throw it out to you guys to see what you think. When it comes to issues like branding, we actually need to go even deeper than product. The way I started to think about things now is every company, every organization has a soul, just the way that every person has a character, you know? And the problem with most of the failed brand type efforts, in my opinion, is because the branding efforts are being run by the marketing department. Like it's almost as if the chief marketing officer is the owner of the brand, and then everybody else just kind of does their own thing, does the business as is. So in the progressive example, the way I kind of look at it is, you know, the marketing department and the branding people spend, you know, billions of dollars at this point building this flow, this friendly, funny, cutesy, whatever thing. But obviously their claims adjustment department has very different ideas about, you know, what they're supposed to do, right? So I almost feel like when we find companies in those types of scenarios where, you know, you could just call it rank hypocrisy, I don't think it's because the marketing people don't believe in the brand. It's because the rest of the company doesn't. In other words, another way to phrase it, I think, would be the brand, at the end of the day, is the company's soul, and therefore it has to be the boss man. It has to be the CEO. It has to be the owner who really cares about it, who really carries it forward. Now, applying that to real estate, I actually think this works perfectly in our industry because you have smaller entities, and they're always small right now, so the big challenge is how do you scale it. We have smaller entities, whether it's agent teams or it's small brokerages like Christina Wise's brokerage, where the boss man, the boss woman really gives a crap and says, you know what, my company, my team is going to run this way, and this is how we treat our people. This, therefore, is the message we're going to do. And I don't have like a separate marketing person who handles the quote branding for me because the brand is everything that we do. It's everything. I mean, it's what we stand for. It's who we are. In exactly the same way, you know, an individual person then, you know, look, if you're an asshole, embrace the asshole character and just be one and just try to be funny about it, right? I mean, it almost will come off better. I think that's the step we have to go almost take the next step on. You know, just as marketers, as brand people, this goes way beyond the product. You know, Apple is not just the products that Apple does. Apple is the entire company as Steve Jobs created it. And that culture is what then creates the product that makes Apple successful and creates loyal following. But I actually think that if you look inside the really successful companies whose brands mean something, I think what you'll find consistency in every department, and it doesn't become, well, you know, that's a brand issue, so take it to the marketing team. Does that make sense to you? I mean, what do you guys think about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll jump in on here, Gaylord. Sorry. I think that's, yeah, it's difficult to disagree with that, but I think it's very primitive brand thinking. I think it's sort of like that's where you start everything, like that kind of stuff. Like the idea of brand running through the DNA of the company and that everybody that works there has an understanding of the values of the organization that they work for is sort of ground zero for that stuff, right?
It's table stakes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, if you're Christina Wise and you have a fairly small team, that is actually easier to manage than the logistics of managing that at a national brokerage, right?
Of
Which
course.
is why Christina's brand is so strong, because she's able to manage that in quite a tight way, I think. And
of course. And her challenge is can you scale it?
She rightfully has a lot of success around that. And you see it with some of the other sort of smaller brokerages, right?
Correct.
But what happens at the national level, and perhaps even above that at the NAR level, which transcends sort of brands and brokerages, is that you get it's so big a branding issue that dilution is sort of inevitable, really, right? Because you have to sort of start to you realize that your audience is actually sort of everyone, which isn't really good brand marketing, right? Apple singles out people, and Amazon, there's a certain Amazon type of user, and there's a certain person that would fly Virgin as opposed to Delta, or things like that. And one of the things that I heard, I heard a presentation last week from the guy from 1-800-Flowers, and they talked about their product not being flowers. They said that their product is smiles. And that's sort of branding double talk a little bit. You know, they said they're in the business of delivering smiles. And he talked about the optimized. Yeah, I know, but the optimized process of one person giving a gift to another, and that person is the recipient of a smile, right? But what he said that was a lot more meaningful to me, he said, one of the things that we talk a lot about at 1-800-Flowers is trying to understand why people love us. And that's a really, really interesting brand conversation because NAR has evangelists, right? There's people that love NAR in the same way that people love Google or people love Facebook, right? But understanding why people love you as opposed to just indifference not only goes back to this idea of sort of mediocrity and versus excellence that we started with, but it allows you to sort of drill down deep into the core DNA of what you're about. And I don't necessarily see that kind of stuff being communicated in these home ownership spots, right? Why? It's almost like you need a why NAR spot in a way, just amongst the industry.
But Matthew, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to bring up is this. The issue with NAR doing any sort of branding campaign, in my mind, right now, is that NAR actually has no idea who they are. So if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what your identity is, and you're absolutely 100% right that this is very primitive branding conversation. Fact of the matter is, though, in our industry, we need to be having those very primitive branding conversations. I can't think of that many brokerages. I can't think of that many associations, MLSs, whoever, who's ready to have the advanced marketing conversations about segmentation and this, that, and the other thing, because they need to actually start having conversations. Who are we? Not in terms of, perception and what's out there. Like, how do we actually conduct ourselves? How do we actually make money? How do we actually run our business?
Right.
Here's the thing. If you go to ask the insiders, if you're to ask some of the people who know, meaning former state association chairs, people who serve on the NAR board, things like that, you know what they end up saying NAR is today? They end up saying NAR is a giant bureaucracy that's concerned about membership numbers. Listen, if that's really who you are inside, and these are your insiders and your high-level, like folks in the know who say that, there is no way in hell you could do a branding campaign around home ownership. There isn't. Who you are is that. So first, you need to change who you are, right?
Right. And changing who you are, if you're a national organization, takes time. It takes time.
And it's hard. It's hard.
I think more than time,
very, very hard.
More than time on this one, it's going to take a different kind of leadership. And I'm not saying I need to elect a new person or whatever. It's not personal. It's like there's a lack of leadership. Like the culture of a society is formed in part by its leadership, by who it chooses to follow and how it chooses to follow them. And business organizations are no different in that regard. Like Steve Jobs was a specific kind of leader, and as a result, Apple has a specific kind of brand. And Jeff Bezos, same deal at Amazon.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's really there's part of it where it's easy to say, and even though it's partially because it's true, I guess, but it's easy to say, well, NAR is so big that nothing can change, and they're so big, and that's just the way it is. But if that's the case, then if that's truly how people feel, then that case it's lost already, right? It's no longer has any kind of meaning. Anyway, that's just kind of the thing there. It's easy to say that there's a big organization and we can't change it. But
I totally agree, Gaylord. I mean, I think that's this should really be a whole conversation because I know we're kind of starting to run a little bit low on time. Now, I would love to have a conversation about the kind of leadership that an organization in search of its identity needs. Because I really do feel like this isn't just NAR. Right. It's a lot of brokerages, a lot of brands. I mean, look, I happen to think Coldwell Banker's on the right spot with their ad. When you have, Magnum PI telling you it's time to buy a house, or extolling the virtues of home ownership, I think they're on the right path to be able to discover some of that. But a lot of the other brands out there, they're still stuck on kind of, use us, we're number one in the market type of approach that I don't know if it's really going to resonate, right? So I almost feel like I would be fascinated to have a conversation really about that topic. Like, what sort of leadership, do you need if you are an entity or an organization searching for your identity? I think that's, I would love to actually have that conversation.
We have an example of a real-time example of that going on right now, Rob. We have Marissa Mayer, who just went into Yahoo. She left Google, and Yahoo, for all its problems, seems to be more energized than ever before.
Correct.
Not than ever before, but in a long time. And, Marissa Mayer is a type of person that is going to sort of rally the troops, energize the product, cut the things that aren't working, and focus. And I think that, if you actually sort of follow the nuts and bolts of kind of what she's doing every day at Yahoo, like she does like very, very small things. Like she reinstituted, I think, like free lunches for everybody. Like she overhauled like the cafeterias on like week 1 that she was there.
Mm-hmm.
So that like employee sentiment is now better than ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like even just sort of like logistical, operational things like that to like just get people thinking in a more focused, qualitative way, right? How to improve the product as opposed to just like how do we hit our numbers each quarter, and standing for something different. I mean, you see this when Steve Jobs returned to Apple based on having been ousted a few years previous.
Right. I think you might be right. I don't know enough about Marissa Mayer, and I don't honestly know that we can pass judgment until we see what she's accomplished. But I agree. I actually have an example that I think might work better in terms of re-energizing a brand.
But I agree with you that leadership and sort of energizing comes from the top. But it has to go right through to like, the person on the front desk and everybody in between.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, it isn't leadership.
Right.
Yeah. And so let me throw my example out there. I would actually venture to say that the best example, because it's so well known right now, because we don't know Marissa Mayer. Most people have no idea who she is, where she came, what she did while she was Gosha. They don't really know. I actually think Paul Ryan being picked as VP is an example of that sort of leadership. Because for 2 reasons. Now, let's not get into the politics of it. One of the things about Ryan is that he is absolutely bold. He's actually tackled things that others said cannot be tackled. And I see a lot of parallels with some of the larger national organizations and associations and companies in our industry. Everything that people say can't happen, won't happen, it's suicidal to tackle it, Paul Ryan's handled it. And by putting him into that position, you can't be a leader if nobody follows you, right? And you know what? That dude is getting he has a following. And you're starting to see energy. You're starting to see a new identity forming, therefore, for at least that campaign. And I would venture to say for the Republican Party as a whole, simply because Ryan stands for something. Agree. Again, whether you agree with the guy or not agree with the guy, I think that if we're going to have that conversation, I would explore, is how much of a prerequisite is that, of having a really clear vision of here's what we need to do.
Right. Exactly.
I'm going to argue that it is.
People get when there's that sense of confusion and disorder within an organization. If you have somebody who comes in with focus and a plan, it's amazingly powerful, especially if they're a charismatic type of individual, right? And, at the end of the day, I think Gaylord and I talk a lot about this as well, it's just as much about what you say no to as what you say yes to. And
absolutely.
I think that kind of leadership in terms of editing and just removing things that aren't working and just saying this is really who we are. We aren't, let's take some examples, right? We aren't search. We aren't sports news. We aren't video. We're, X, Y, and Z in the product category, and we're just going to compete like hell on these 3 specific niche topics. if you do that, then that allows everybody to get on the same page with it.
Right.
And so many, I think so many folks within the real estate industry, as more options for things to do at the brand and marketing level in terms of not only platform but content opportunities and types of messaging and things like that, as more of those have sort of exploded over the last 5 to 6 years, there's been a dilution in, brand recognition, certainly at the national level and definitely at the NAR level. But there's also sort of like a dilution of focus in terms of like who you actually are, because everybody's trying to do everything, and everybody's trying to compete on every single kind of platform, as opposed to, as you just said, standing for something. And if you stand for something, then that's how you really sort of get people to follow you, I think, not to sound too sort of bombastic about it. But, and Steve Jobs said that. He said, we're not this. We're not this. And there's a great story about Steve Jobs' inbox, his email inbox, where they analyzed the sent folder, right, in his email box. And I think that they said it was something like 70% of all of his outgoing mail was just the word no. And I love that story. I love that story because he just relentlessly said no to things as a way of trying to streamline the product focus and the brand focus.
Yeah.
Said no to everything all the time. And as a result, you get this minimalist, sort of beautiful brand experience that translates from the genius at the bar in the store through online, through to, what goes on your iPad, when you're reading Instapaper or something like that. It's something that goes right through the whole product mix. And that's why people start to evangelize brands, I think.
Oh, well, right on. This is so great, but man, we are out of time.
Already.
I know it's like an hour just goes by. We haven't done. But I really think we should have that leadership conversation, again at some point. It's a topic that is fascinating. But we haven't done this in a couple of weeks, guys. But in terms of wrap up, what's the big news next week? Let's try that again. What do you say? What do you say, guys? Gaylord, want to tell us what you think we'll all be talking about next week?
I think next week we're going to be talking about Romney finally releasing a bunch of his tax returns.
Controversial. I'm not sure. One of the things I'm not sure that this is a particularly hot topic, but one of the things I have my eye on is actually what's going on over at Dig. I was a huge Dig user about 5 years ago, and their product sort of was left to wither on the vine. They had a couple of pivots along the way, and they recently got sort of reacquired, and their product is undergoing sort of like a renaissance in terms of user development and rebirth, I think. And it's a really, really interesting example of what happens to a social network when it dies and then gets the opportunity to kind of come back to life. So I'm really interested in what's going on at Dig at the moment, not from a real estate perspective, but just from a sort of online network and content perspective. I think it's fascinating what's going on over there.
I think next week we'll probably I actually think we end up still talking about realestate.com and that whole IDX issue. I know we didn't talk about it at all in this podcast, but I have a feeling it's going to be still very much alive even into next week, just because there's so much energy around that particular topic. So, hopefully we'll be able to address that, at some point after some of the dust settle. But gentlemen, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Gaylord and I might come to blows, as this election silly season goes on.
We agree on the important things, Rob.
That's right.
We agree on the important things.
And Matthew just laughs at us Americans.
Hey, I'm all about, taxation without representation. I don't have a vote.
You're definitely suited for Washington, D.C., my friend. So listen, it was great talking to you guys, and For anybody who listened through all of this, thanks for downloading the podcast. We will see you next week.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Take care.
3, that's a magic number. Yes, it is. It's the magic number.